Welcome to Let the Quran Speak. I'm Aisha, your host. On today's episode, let's explore one final topic in the category of personal trauma, identity crisis. What does this term mean, and can one truly cope and overcome the struggle while still holding on to one's faith? As always, let's sit down with none other than Dr. Shabir Ally. Welcome to the show, Dr. Shabir.
Pleasure as usual.
So we're continuing our conversation on crisis of faith, personal trauma. We're going to focus on identity crisis today. So based on your experience and understanding, how would you define identity crisis?
Well, I would go with the definition that was given by Yusuf Shuhood in his article posted on the Yaqeen Institute website. Basically, Yusuf Shuhood has cataloged the various reasons why people are having doubts in their faith in Islam. And under this item of the crisis of faith, he deals with personal trauma and more so with the question of identity. So one might have an identity issue. Let's say somebody is identifying as a person of same-sex orientation, and that person would feel out of place within the Muslim communities that do not seem geared towards welcoming persons of same-sex orientation. Or somebody may be of a particular race, and they would find that within the Muslim community there is a certain degree of racism. Or one might find generally that there isn't a welcoming atmosphere within the Muslim community. So the question is, do I actually belong here? Whereas in the case of one girl, in the Detroit area, she found that when she went to the church with her grandmother, people in the church welcomed her, and she felt like so graciously received that it's as if she actually belongs there. And that led to her leaving the faith of Islam and joining the other community. So these are some of the kinds of issues that that occur. But there is also a broader issue that could affect people more widely, and that is the sense that when you like let's say one of the young Muslims growing up in North America comes to the realization that capital punishment is not a good thing. Now, let's say within the Muslim community it's being talked about as if this is a good thing because Islamic law traditionally had elements of capital punishment. So one might be in a state of like shock over this, like feeling that it is part of one's identity that we hold to certain principles. And then you come to the mosque and it looks like the mosque holds to the opposite of what we hold internally. So this becomes an identity imbalance for the person.
So it's trying to understand where you are and then intersectionalities of the faith in terms of how it fits into that.
Yes.
Okay, so what I want to do is go through some of the individual cases that you brought up. So how does one deal with the situation? Say there's a Muslim person who identifies as being homosexual, but then how do you reconcile that with the faith on an individual level, knowing that there are certain limitations in Islam, when it comes to associated acts?
Yes, there are many different approaches to this. Most Muslim scholars would say that the prohibition is clear in the Quran, so one could not enter into homosexual acts. But we would then make some accommodation in our minds for the fact that the orientation is real. And we know that the orientation is real because we sometimes hear in the news that a young person has committed suicide, whether or not Muslim or non-Muslim. They have been struggling with homosexuality for some time, and they way to exit from this turmoil, being drawn towards homosexuality, but at the same time considering it's something wrong, and thinking that something is wrong with the person himself or herself. The way out of this is to commit suicide. And of course, this is far more terrible than the homosexual act itself from within the Muslim point of view. So we are now, in our own minds, finding some accommodation for the idea that the orientation is real, and some people are going through a real struggle with that. But still, the general prescription would be stay chaste, remain celibate if you have to, but don't enter into homosexual acts. So we're not condemning the orientation itself, but we're saying that the act is prohibited, and just because somebody has a certain orientation or an inclination, it does not mean that you have to act on that. That would be the general answer. Some others are looking more deeply at this and realizing that there are different situations and circumstances which may call for a different sort of attitude towards a thing. We know, for example, alcohol is prohibited. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
And in Muslim communities, certain laws would be in place to deal with one who violates the law by becoming drunk. But that same law was not traditionally applied, like let's say when Muslims went out into a campaign, into a battle that would be long and drawn out, so they were in a foreign land. Why not apply the penalty then? Because if one of the soldiers became drunk, and if you were to apply the penalty, then he might be inclined to disengage from the Muslim army and then go join the enemies, because he will be safe with the enemies with his crime. So in that situation, you wouldn't apply the penalty because it will cause more harm than good. So now we have to think more broadly about our current situation. Applying a strict measure against persons with homosexual orientation, would you actually drive them out of the community and make them feel safe somewhere else with their orientations? We have to take that all into consideration. So some people are looking at that more broadly. What I would recommend for Muslims more generally is to have a kind of a broader accommodation for people as they are. When people come into the mosque, you don't dive into their personal details and find out, what they're doing outside of the mosque situation. They come into the mosque so long as they're there peacefully worshiping, observing the decorum of the mosque. You welcome them with open arms, and you make them feel that they are part of the community.
I mean, that would be in an ideal situation, but
Yes.
Unfortunately, that's not always the case. So how do you deal with, I guess now on the other side, if people from within the community ensuring that they're not shunning other people out? Because, they'll have, I've heard of stories where someone will come, drunk to the mosque, or a woman is trying to escape and she's not covered properly, and the mosque isn't as welcome, or the people within the mosque. So how do you sort of begin to start on an individual level, not be so judgmental, and sort of leave people as they are? I guess, what's the solution from the other end?
You mean from the perspective of the person who's feeling discriminated against, or feeling
from
that
the
this
person
mosque
who from the other side, as a
Okay.
community, like on an individual level? No one's going to come out and say, yeah, I discriminate, and
Yeah.
I think this person shouldn't be in the mosque. Nobody's going to say that, but we all know there are people there who feel like that. So how do you overcome those feelings of, okay, no, this person shouldn't be in the mosque, this person shouldn't be here? How do you overcome that?
We should recognize where that feeling comes from. That feeling comes from, the idea that there is a set of laws, and God is going to strictly, penalize people for disobeying these laws. That's not necessarily the right conclusion. God is forgiving and He's merciful, and He sees people according to their circumstances. He knows that some people are very schooled in the religion, and some people are acculturated within the religion. They've been practicing these principles since they were children. Some people are new to the religion altogether. Some people may have been Muslims all their lives, but they never realized it, and suddenly they realized it and they started coming to the mosque. So you have to give them time, you have to give them space. Sometimes the feeling comes from the idea, you know what, I'm doing all of these things assiduously, and I'm making all of these sacrifices and going out of my way to obey God. Why couldn't everybody else do that? Well, not everybody else has the same guidance that God has given you. So you have to see that as a privilege, that God has given you that guidance to come close to God in these ways. If other people have not been given that guidance or privilege or blessing from God, see that as a reason to pity the other person, not to be angry at the other person. And of course, it's never a reason for you to feel like you have a chip on your shoulder. I have been obeying God in all of these ways, because it may be that the other person has a greater level of sincerity than you have. You've been going through all of the motions, but how do you know that God has actually accepted all of your motions? And maybe this other person who has come in with one little iota of of goodness in the path of God, that person has come in with a great deal of sincerity that overweighs all of your good deeds. You're going through the motions. So we should never have any reason to think that we're better than the other person. The Quran itself tells us in the 49th chapter, don't let not one group of people look down on another people, because it is possible that the people you look down upon are actually better than you in the sight of God.
What about, just as we wrap up, one more scenario you talked about earlier, someone going through an identity crisis where they have a set of rules and laws they follow in Islam, and they find that, in the case of capital punishment, the mosque is completely opposed, and you feel like you're sort of split between two worlds. How do you figure that out?
Well, a lot of people are going through this, a lot of young people, and it is high time for the Muslim scholarship to rise to the occasion and look back at some of the classical rulings, understand the historical circumstances in which these were first applied, look at the newness of our present circumstance, including the very fact that human thought has evolved. Has benefited from all of the lessons of history. We recognize certain things to be good, certain things to be bad intrinsically. And based on everything that has happened in history, for example, we can see that wars are very bad, coming and sitting now at the other end of the two world wars, World War I, World War II. We don't want such devastation. So we recognize intrinsically that war is not a good thing. So you can't now tell the youth that war is a good thing. It's not going to go down well. It will create for them a kind of cognitive dissonance. So we have to be careful in the way in which we present the ideas of Islam to make sure that they are contextual. We have to understand the rulings of the Quran against the backdrop of the socio-historical political situation in which these verses were first revealed. And we have to understand how our present realities differ from that original situation, such that the laws have to be applied in a way that captures the original spirit and the justice that was intended in the first place.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Dr. Shabir.
You're welcome.
Hey YouTube, we hope you benefited from this video. If you liked it, or if you didn't, let us know in the comments below. And if you're interested in learning more, check out some of our other videos. And don't forget to subscribe so you can get new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.